I'm no fan of Sam Harris's, or Dave Rubin's for that matter. I'm not even sure even why we're talking about this, but Sam Harris is a guy who doesn't seem to understand, have any sense of politics whatsoever, and is so immersed in. I think this guy so appreciates the sound of his own voice that he says things without really thinking about them a lot of times, or without contemplating the implications of them. With that said, Dave Rubin's also a total moron who, even if he was to spend time about the things he was talking coming out of his mouth, he wouldn't understand them. So this is sort of a fun back and forth. Play this.
There was a clip that apparently went viral about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, pause. This is Dave Rubin talking about Sam Harris was on a show called what? Triggernometry?
The Triggernometry podcast.
And what is this about? Like people are like, people get triggered by stuff.
It's like
it's like two fledgling comedians.
Yeah,
right?
it's two comedians, and it's like they don't say anything about like we want to trigger you. It's like we just want to have honest conversations,
honest discourse.
Oh, thank God.
But this is Rubin coming back after
so he's catching up on things.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Is Sam Harris on the Triggernometry podcast, which I've done the Triggernometry podcast. I consider those guys friends. They're doing some good stuff over there. It's a British podcast, and they do a lot of similar stuff that we do here.
I bet.
Anyway, Sam went on to defend censorship and getting Trump off Twitter and why we shouldn't care about Hunter Biden's laptop and a whole bunch of other stuff. So this is Sam a couple weeks ago.
Listen, I don't care what's in Hunter Biden's life. I mean, Hunter Biden, at that point, Hunter Biden literally could have had the corpses of children in his basement. I would not have cared, right? It's like, there's nothing. First of all, it's Hunter Biden, right? It's not Joe Biden. But even if whatever scope of Joe Biden's corruption is, like if we could just go down that rabbit hole endlessly and understand that he's getting kickbacks from Hunter Biden's deals in Ukraine or wherever else, right? Or China. It is infinitesimal compared to the corruption we know Trump is involved in.
Pause it for a second. Now, I personally would have real issues with Joe Biden getting kickbacks from Hunter Biden for stuff. And really the operative point is, look, Sam Harris is happy to choose. If I had to choose between Trump and Biden, I would vote for Biden, not because I don't think that, Biden getting kickbacks, which the real point is he didn't, is because a president really is just a head of a group of people who will enter into government.
Yeah, it's a figurehead for a coalition, and you pick which coalition is best, and that's never a difficult.
Exactly. I mean, that's the bottom line. Like, I don't care if Joe Biden's a nice guy or a bad guy. I don't care about what who he is in any way. And frankly, I never cared any difference between Donald Trump. Ron DeSantis, just as bad as Donald Trump is, in my mind. I mean, yes, Trump may be more criminal, maybe, than Ron DeSantis. I don't want to besmirch Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, it's open competition.
It's open competition. But the petty criminality of Donald Trump is not my problem with Donald Trump. My problem with Donald Trump is he does the bidding of the Republican Party, largely, almost. Maybe exclusively. I mean, and everybody he puts in there are the worst of the Republican Party. That's the point. But Harrison, sort of like classic Sam Harris fashion, is like,
not helping.
Well, not helping, but also like what's really important is my when I talk about politics, is my freedom of expression about sort of like formulating, my personal philosophical. I mean, it really is. I mean, this is the same guy who, like, again, writes in Huffington Post, and you use your own titles then, incidentally. I think it was literally like in defense of torture. And it was, for him, it was just a philosophical sort of meandering about torture. But he wrote that on one of the biggest platforms that existed at the time in the midst of a huge debate about torture in this country. As if like, oh, I'm allowed because I, got a PhD to operate in a total vacuum that is divorced from politics. But continue.
Compared to the corruption we know Trump is involved in, it's like a firefly to the sun, right? I mean, like there's just it doesn't even stack up against Trump University, right? Trump University as a story is worse than anything that could be in Hunter Biden's laptop, in my view, right? Now, that doesn't answer the people who say it's still completely unfair to not have looked at the laptop in a timely way and to have shut down the New York Post's Twitter account. Like that's just a conspiracy. That's a left-wing conspiracy to deny the presidency to Donald Trump. Absolutely, it was. Absolutely, right? But I think it was warranted. Right. And again, it's a coin toss as to whether or not
Sam, I'm sorry.
That particular piece.
I'm really sorry. I was the one that said we should move on, but you've just said something I really struggle with there, which is
the kids in the basement.
Fuck the kids in the basement. I'm interested in democracy. You're saying you are content with a left-wing conspiracy to prevent somebody being democratically re-elected as president.
Well, no, I'm content. Well, but the thing is, it's just not left wing, right? So Liz Cheney is not left wing.
Wait, what? I paused. He literally just did say it was a left wing conspiracy.
Cool.
First of all, it's not a left wing conspiracy. Twitter, Jack Dorsey, not a left wing person.
Mark Zuckerberg, Joe Kaplan, no,
these are not. And the New York Post. The other sort of amazing thing about this is that like, there was nothing there that they could present. The laptop is real. It exists. It was out there. They were never able to make it mean anything other than Hunter Biden was an F up. When you have control of the highest rating cable television show in the country and things like Fox News and the Post and whatnot. If you have a problem with Twitter shutting down accounts, what you need to do is make Twitter not so relevant within the conversation by not essentially allowing any private corporation to become the town square. And the thing that you get from the right here, whether it's, and by right, I mean the libertarian brain, whether it's Dave Rubin or Glenn Greenwald or whatnot is, they're not going to make it about the structure that disallows a private corporation from being the town hall, from having dominance over what we hear. They're going to make it about they're just playing the refs here. Yeah. That's all they're doing. They're just playing the refs. They have no problem with corporations essentially taking over the public square. They have no problem with corporations taking over the role of government. I mean, right? Like we give a monopoly of authority to the government. They have no problem with giving corporations monopoly of authority over what we say, and the only way you can inhibit that from happening is to not allow them to have a monopoly, because you cannot have the government go in, and they would be against this in a moment. If the government started to regulate and say, you cannot have a social media platform and disallow anything. The idea that the government could come in and say, as soon as the valuation for Facebook tanks and the valuation for Google tanks and the valuation for all of these companies tank, these right-wingers would be like, whoa, wait a second. And they would tank, because if they were full of, let's say, calls for pedophilia, calls for the elimination of Jews, let's say, if they became the cesspools that they would have them become, people would just leave. People would just leave. And they would go to a platform where they could go and not have to see that kind of stuff. And then the problem would replicate itself. But that's not, their agenda is not to have freedom of expression or to not be sort of excluded from the town hall. Their agenda is to make themselves feel aggrieved and to attack different institutions that they can, and I guarantee you in 2 or 3 years, it'll be something different. They'll have moved on to some other thing. This is just more convenient, but continue.
Cheney's
You're
doing
content with
everything
a
in her power.
conspiracy to prevent somebody being
but
democratically
it's not
elected.
but there's nothing conspiracy. It's not. It was a conspiracy out in the open. But it doesn't matter if it was. It doesn't matter what part's conspiracy, what part's out in the open.
Okay, so there is a lot to unpack there, as Sam would say. So first off, I want to just say something. Sam and I were friends for many years. I'm not really sure if we're friends anymore, to be quite honest with you, and it doesn't really matter, and I'm not going to attack him personally here. I'm just simply not going to do that. 7 years ago this week, in 2015, I think this was on September 12th, 2015, we launched the Rubin Report as this show, and as an interview show at first, and then ultimately what became this. Sam was my first guest. Wow. So he's been an integral part, and I would say my own political evolution, as many of you know, and I wrote about it, Don't Burn This Book. You know, Sam on Real Time with Bill Maher when he got into that fight with Ben Affleck, as Sam was calmly talking about the difference between criticizing ideas. In this case, he was talking about ideas about religion.
Yeah, you know, we could probably end it there. I mean, all he does is say how sad it is that Sam Harris.
He doesn't have any critique of it?
He's basically like, Sam's gone crazy. He's gone over into Trump derangement syndrome, unlike those other people who are making the right move, like Joe Rogan. That's basically the video.
I mean, I think Harris actually sort of was like a little bit disturbed by the fact that he, at one point, he realized like in 2016 or 2017, like, oh my gosh, somehow the audience I've collected with my Islamophobia right now, like, I mean, that was like 7 years ago. And I would imagine if we would go back and watch that Dave Rubin, Sam Harris clip, it would be about how the massive threat that the Muslim world presents to us. That would probably be, I would say, if I had to guess, like what the entire interview pivoted around. Now, somehow that's just dissolved.
Yeah, I bet there were even caveats saying all fundamentalism is bad and religious extremism maybe a little bit.
Maybe.
But that's definitely gone now.
I can tell you at that time that Sam Harris's speaking tour was at like, I think the majority of his spots were like literally sponsored by brotherhoods of temples around the country, of Jewish synagogues. But put that aside. The bottom line is that like Harris was never anybody who sort of like whose analysis of politics or any of these things were either historical or contextualized in a proper way. Was there an attempt to diminish the importance of the Biden notebook? I mean, laptop? Of course. Just like there was an attempt to diminish all of Donald Trump's moves. I mean, that's what happens in a political campaign.
It's documented that like Facebook internally was looking at different sorts of moderation thing for right-wing extremism, and people like Joe Kaplan, executives at Facebook, found out that actually we're in this dragnet for hate. We're picking up a bunch of like Republican candidates for Congress, so we need to pull back on moderation. This is all work in the refs, right? Like that's why they feel compelled to do it. It's not because they're secret Democrats or radicals. It's because they're worried about the perception of their company, because perception isn't, there's a, like the idea that conservatives think that these companies are just attacking them when like Ben Shapiro camps at the top of trending list all the time. And I just think it's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. And again, like it is, I think that the Hunter Biden story, I think it was completely irrelevant to Joe Biden's presidential run in many respects, but I have no problem with that getting out there any more than I did with, like, Billy Carter's, taking a pee outdoors impact, being reported on that. Yes, family members of politicians get discussed all the time. Do I think it would have made a difference in the election? No. Not at all.
I think what happened probably made the Hunter Biden laptop a bigger story than it would have been anyway.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Joe Biden wasn't even in office at that time. That's the thing that people forget. Like, he was a former vice president that no one thought at that time was going to be back into office. No one.
Yeah, like I almost feel like even like late February 2020, there was like he was kind of considered like dead in the water and kind of almost like a joke relative to everybody else.
Yep.